At 44 years old, Daniel had $2,300,000. He also had a cardiologist, a stent in his left anterior descending artery, and a printed sheet of paper telling him what he was allowed to eat. He did not lose his health in an accident. He did not lose it to bad luck or bad genes. He traded it, slowly, on purpose, in exchanges so small that not one of them ever felt like a decision. Here is what almost nobody will tell you about the trade between money and health. It is not a fair trade. It is not a reversible trade. And the exchange rate gets worse every single year you keep making it. But it is also not the trade you think it is. Because the honest research says something stranger and far more useful than money doesn't matter. Let's do the math nobody does. In 2011, Daniel was 30 years old and made $58,000 a year. He weighed 168 pounds. He slept about 7.5 hours. His resting heart rate was 58. His blood pressure was 118/74. He played basketball on Thursdays with people from his old job. By 2025, he made $340,000 a year. He weighed 214 pounds. He slept 5.5 hours on a good night. His resting heart rate was 78. His blood pressure was 148/96. His A1C was 6.4, which is a clinical way of saying his body had mostly stopped listening to insulin. He had not played basketball since 2016. Nobody sat Daniel down in 2011 and said, "We would like to buy 14 years of your cardiovascular health, and in exchange, we will pay you approximately $2.3 million. If somebody had said it out loud, he might have negotiated. Instead, it arrived the way it always arrives, as a series of reasonable, temporary, obviously worth it decisions. The 6:30 a.m. call with the East Coast team, just for this quarter. The gym membership that stayed on autopay for 2 years and got used 11 times. He'd restart in January, the Thursday basketball game he missed 4 weeks in a row until they stopped texting him, the dinner at 9:40 p.m. because the client dinner ran long, and then the drink after, and then the 4 hours and 40 minutes of sleep that he told himself he'd catch up on Saturday. This is the actual mechanism, not one big sacrifice, 10,000 small ones, each of which was genuinely, defensibly worth it in isolation. That is what makes it so hard to see. There is no moment to say no to. And here is the uncomfortable part. For a very long time, the trade works. The extra hours are not imaginary. They compound in exactly the way you hope. Daniel took the 6:30 calls, so he got the enterprise accounts. The enterprise accounts got him promoted. The promotion got him equity. The equity is most of the $2.3 million. If he had worked 40 hours a week for 14 years, he would not have $2.3 million. He would have somewhere around 600,000 or 700,000. That is not a rounding error. That is a different life for his kids. So let's not pretend the people who tell you that overwork never pays are lying to you, and you already know it, which is why you stop listening to the rest of what they say. Overwork pays. The question was never whether it pays. The question is what currency you're being paid in and what currency you're paying with, and whether those two things trade at the rate you assume. Because here is the assumption almost everyone is running on: I'll build the money now and buy the health back later. That sentence is the entire subject of this video, and it contains one enormous, load-bearing, mostly false premise. Let's take it apart. In 2021, the World Health Organization and the International Labor Organization published the first global analysis of the health effects of long working hours in the journal Environment International. They looked at people working 55 or more hours a week compared to people working a standard 35 to 40. The 55-hour group had approximately a 35% higher risk of stroke and a 17% higher risk of dying from ischemic heart disease. They estimated that in 2016 alone, long working hours were associated with about 745,000 deaths worldwide. 745,000 people in 1 year from hours. Now hold that next to something else. The Whitehall 2 study, run by Michael Marmot, following thousands of British civil servants for decades, found that heart disease risk did not track simply with how hard people worked. It tracked with how much control they had over their work. The people lower in the hierarchy, with less autonomy over their own day, had substantially worse cardiovascular outcomes than the people above them, even with healthcare access held constant. That finding is critical, and it's usually left out because it complicates the story. It means the damage is not purely mechanical. It's not just hours in, disease out. It is hours plus the specific physiological state of being under demand you can't control. Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University spent his career naming this. He called it allostatic load, the cumulative wear on the body from repeatedly firing the stress response and never fully switching it off. Cortisol, that's supposed to spike and clear, instead stays mildly elevated for years. Blood pressure resets to a new normal. Visceral fat accumulates. Inflammatory markers creep. Sleep architecture degrades, which degrades glucose control, which degrades everything downstream. None of this shows up as an event. It shows up as a number on a lab report that is still technically within range. Until 1 year, it isn't. And then there's the sleep line specifically. A meta-analysis led by Francesco Cappuccio, published in the European Heart Journal, pooled studies covering hundreds of thousands of people and found that short sleepers, under roughly 6 hours a night, had close to a 48% greater risk of developing or dying from coronary heart disease. Daniel slept 5.5 hours for 9 years. 9 years times 365 nights. He did not think of that as a health decision. He thought of it as being productive. Here's where almost every video on this topic goes wrong, and I'm not going to. Because if you only heard what I just said, you conclude that money is the enemy of health. The data says close to the opposite. In 2016, Raj Chetty and colleagues published a landmark analysis in the Journal of the American Medical Association using income and mortality records for over 1 billion person years in the United States. The finding, the richest 1% of American men lived on average about 14.5 years longer than the poorest 1%. For women, the gap was roughly 10 years. 14 years. That is not a lifestyle difference. That is a generation. Poverty is not neutral for the body. It means delayed care. Worse chronic disease management, worse food environments, worse air, worse housing, more physical injury, more untreated dental disease, more sleep disruption, and vastly more of exactly the uncontrollable stress Whitehall 2 was measuring. Ann Case and Angus Deaton documented the extreme end of this in their work on what they named deaths of despair. The rise in mortality from suicide, overdose, and alcoholic liver disease concentrated among Americans without a college degree and without stable, decent-paying work. And in the United States specifically, the financial dimension is brutal in a way that's easy to forget if you have good insurance. KFF's 2022 Healthcare Debt Survey found that roughly 41% of U.S. adults carried debt from medical or dental bills. So money is not the opposite of health. For most of the range, money is an input to health. One of the strongest inputs there is, which raises the actual question, the one this entire video exists to answer. If money buys health, at what point does it stop? This is the single most important idea here, so I'm going to say it slowly. The curve that turns money into health is extremely steep at the bottom and almost flat at the top. Going from $30,000 a year to $100,000 a year changes your health outcomes enormously. You get consistent care, you get to fill the prescription, you get to take the sick day, you get to live somewhere with sidewalks and a grocery store, you get to sleep because you're not working 2 jobs and worrying about rent at 2 a.m. Going from $100,000 to $340,000 buys you a fraction of that. Chetty's own data shows the mortality gradient compressing hard in the upper income ranges. There is no third stent that a $4 million unlocks. There is no supplement stack that outperforms sleeping 7 hours. Now put the happiness research next to it because it has the same shape and an important twist. In 2010, Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton found that day-to-day emotional well-being rose with income and then plateaued around $75,000 a year, while life satisfaction how you rate your life when you think about it kept rising. In 2021, Matthew Killingsworth challenged that plateau with real-time sampling data and found well-being continued to rise with log income past that point. So in 2023, they did something researchers almost never do. Killingsworth and Kahneman, along with Barbara Mellers, ran an adversarial collaboration. They worked together specifically to find out who was wrong. The answer they published: for most people, well-being does keep rising with income, but for the least happy, roughly 20%, it rises until about $100,000 and then flattens out completely. Read that carefully. If your unhappiness is caused by something money can fix, money keeps fixing it. If your unhappiness is caused by something money cannot fix, a failing body, a dying marriage, loneliness, grief, then past a certain point, the money simply stops working. That is the mechanism of Daniel's mistake, stated precisely. He kept applying a tool long past the point where it was still solving the problem, because it was the tool he was best at using. So now let's talk about the actual asymmetry between the two accounts, because they do not behave the same way. Money has one property that health does not. It recovers fully. If Daniel lost $800,000 in a bad market in 2022, by 2026 he would most likely have it back, plus more. Financial drawdowns are almost always temporary if you have income and time. Health drawdowns are partly permanent. Some of it does come back, and this is genuinely good news. So hold on to it. Cardiorespiratory fitness is trainable at essentially any age. Muscle is rebuildable in your 60s and 70s. Blood pressure, A1C, liver fat, and inflammatory markers all respond to changes in behavior, sometimes within months. Daniel's cardiologist told him, correctly, that most of his numbers were fixable, but some of it does not come back. Arterial plaque does not unform. A degenerated disc does not regenerate. Hearing loss from a decade in loud rooms is gone. Teeth do not grow back. And the specific window in which your kids were 7 and 11 and wanted you at the table does not reopen at any price. And here is the compounding part, which is the reason this video is on this channel at all. Health compounds exactly like money, and it is subject to exactly the same enemy, which is delay. A study led by Kyle Mansiger at the Cleveland Clinic, published in JAMA Network Open in 2018, followed over 120,000 patients who had done treadmill testing. The finding, low cardiorespiratory fitness, was associated with a mortality risk comparable to or greater than traditional risk factors like smoking, diabetes, and coronary artery disease. The gap between the elite fitness group and the low fitness group was several-fold. The Pure study, published in The Lancet, followed around 140,000 people across 17 countries and found that grip strength, literally how hard you can squeeze, was a stronger predictor of all-cause and cardiovascular mortality than systolic blood pressure. Fitness and strength are not vanity metrics. They are statistically among the most powerful assets you can hold. And like an index fund, they are built by unremarkable deposits made consistently for a very long time, which means the person who trains 3 hours a week starting at 28 is not 3 hours ahead of the person who starts at 45. They are 2 decades of accumulated capacity ahead, and that capacity is what determines whether the heart attack at 63 is survivable. You cannot lump sum health at the end. There is no catch-up contribution. So let's actually price the trade Daniel made. This is an illustrative model, not a case study, but every input is realistic. Over 14 years, Daniel averaged about 62 hours a week instead of 40. That's 22 extra hours a week, 50 weeks a year for 14 years, 15,400 hours. His extra wealth from that path, the 2.3 million versus the roughly 650,000 a 40-hour version of his career would plausibly have produced, is about $1.65 million. Divided out, and every additional hour Daniel worked bought him roughly $107 of net worth. That is a genuinely excellent hourly rate, better than almost anyone reading this will get. On the money side of the ledger, Daniel won decisively. Now the other column, 15,400 hours. That is about 640 full days. Almost 2 years of continuous life taken out of sleep, out of movement, out of the hours when his family was awake. At 44, he had a 70% blockage in a major coronary artery and a stent. He spent about $9,000 out of pocket and 3 months at reduced capacity. On a $2.3 million net worth, the financial cost of the cardiac event was functionally zero. That is the point. The money was never the thing at risk. He's now on a statin and a blood pressure medication he will likely take for the rest of his life. He has, by his cardiologist's estimate, meaningfully raised his lifetime risk of a second event. So what was the exchange rate? $107 an hour, paid in cash, purchased with an hour that came out of sleep, movement, or the people who love him. And the cruel part, the last 4 years of that trade were the least worth making. Because by 2021, Daniel had already crossed into the flat part of the curve. He had already bought all the health that money buys. Everything after that point was pure payment with nothing purchased. He didn't stop, because there was no alarm. There is never an alarm. The account balance keeps going up, which feels exactly like winning, right up until a Tuesday morning when your chest feels tight on the stairs. There is one more body of evidence I have to put in front of you, because it is the longest running study of its kind on Earth. The Harvard study of adult development has been following the same men, and later their families, since 1938, nearly 9 decades. George Vaillant ran it for 30 years. Robert Waldinger runs it now. Their most cited finding, out of 80 plus years of data, is this. The quality of people's close relationships at age 50 predicted their physical health at age 80 better than their cholesterol levels did. Not their income, not their cholesterol, their relationships. Loneliness, in that data set and many since, behaves like a cardiovascular risk factor. It shows up in the body. So here is the honest list of what does not have a price tag, and I want you to notice that every item on it is something Daniel spent without recording. Sleep that you did not take. It does not accrue. There is no Saturday long enough. Arterial and metabolic health passed a certain threshold of damage. Some of it you get back, some of it becomes a permanent line item. The years when your parents are still well enough to travel with you, and the specific non-repeating window in which the people around you are still in the habit of including you. That last one is the quietest. Nobody announces that they've stopped inviting you. Daniel's Thursday basketball group didn't have a meeting about it. They just stopped texting, because after the 11th no, you stop asking. Now, I'm not going to end this with slow down and smell the roses, because that is useless and you'd close the video annoyed. Here is what the evidence actually supports, framed the way a person who thinks in numbers can use it. Treat these as constraints, not goals. A goal is something you try to hit. A constraint is something you build the rest of your life around. 1. Set a sleep floor and treat it like rent. Not a target, a floor. 7 hours. Defended the way you defend a mortgage payment. If a job structurally cannot be done inside a 7-hour sleep floor, that is information about the job, not about your discipline. This is the highest leverage single item on the list, and it is free. 2. Buy the cheapest insurance policy in existence, about 3 hours a week. The standard public health guidance is roughly 150 minutes of moderate aerobic activity a week, plus 2 sessions of resistance training. That's under 3 hours. Given the Cleveland Clinic fitness data and the pure grip strength data, there is arguably no other 3 hours in your week with a comparable expected return, financial or otherwise. 3. Get the data at 30, not at 50. Daniel's blockage did not appear in 2025. It had been building for a decade, silently, while every one of his annual physicals said fine. An annual blood panel, lipids including ApoB, A1C, HSCRP, liver markers, plus blood pressure measured at home, is a few $100s. You already track your net worth monthly. Track the other account at least yearly. 4. Write down the price you will not pay before you're offered it. This is the one that actually saves people. Decide now, in a calm moment, what you will not trade. Not, I'll be more balanced. A specific, checkable line. I do not take calls before 7. I am home for dinner 4 nights a week. I do not travel more than 6 nights a month. You will be offered a great deal to break it, and you will be offered it on a day when you are tired, which is exactly the day you cannot evaluate it. The decision has to be made in advance, or it will not be made at all. 5. Protect the relationships like an asset because the Harvard data says they are one. Put the standing thing on the calendar. Show up to the Thursday game badly and out of shape rather than not at all. The compounding on that account is slow and completely invisible until you're 80, at which point it is the only account that's still paying out. And one honest caveat said plainly, I'm not a doctor and this is not medical advice. It's a summary of published research. The specific version of this that applies to your body comes from someone who can actually run your labs. Daniel is 45 now. He still works, and he still makes a great deal of money. He sleeps 7 hours. He walks 45 minutes most mornings before the first call. He lifts twice a week, badly. His blood pressure is 124/78. He has lost 26 pounds, and he will probably be on a statin forever. He says the strangest part is that his income didn't drop. 14 years of believing the hours were load-bearing, and when he finally removed them, the building stood. That may not be true for everybody. For some people, the hours really are the difference between making it and not, and pretending otherwise is its own kind of lie. But it is true far more often than anyone working 62 hours a week is willing to test. So, money or health. The framing is wrong, and now you know exactly why. Money buys health, steeply, right up until it doesn't. The entire skill is knowing where your own flat part of the curve begins, and refusing to keep paying after you've crossed it. Below that line, chase the money. It is one of the best health interventions available to you. Above it, you are just paying. Here's my question, and I want the specific answer, not the noble one. What is the exact thing you are currently trading? The hour, the night, the habit, the person, and what is it actually buying you this year? Write it in the comments, not the answer you'd give in a job interview, the real one, because the trade is happening either way. The only choice you have is whether you're the one setting the price.